What's up, Bat Fam? Let's talk about some movement. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learn to Play series for the Batman miniature game. This is going to be part 3 where we talk about some of the basic rules for the game, along with everything you need to know as far as movement is concerned. So starting off with line of sight, what you need to know as far as that's concerned is that each model has kind of a 360-degree view, meaning that the orientation and the facing of the model doesn't really matter. They're going to be able to see behind them and all around them. The Batman miniature game is primarily played at nighttime. So what that means is that you're going to have a limited field of view, and you're only going to have 12 inches from the edge of your base to be able to see other models. If they're outside of that 12-inch distance, you're not going to be able to kind of target them for any ranged attacks or any sort of traits or anything. So keep that in mind. You do kind of have only a little 12-inch bubble around your characters where they can actually see. But that's where streetlights come into play. We talked about those in the Batman Essentials video, but the street lamps are going to illuminate parts of the board, and you'll be placing those out during board setup, and they illuminate a 4-inch radius around the base of the lights. So if you place a street light on one end of the board and there's a model right next to it, then any model that has kind of a direct line of sight to it is going to be able to see it, no matter the distance. So keep that in mind when you're placing your streetlights in the beginning of the game. That way you can kind of put them in strategic locations. And also, keep in mind that you're not going to be able to see all the way across the board unless your character has traits that allow them to do that. Of course, there is a few different traits that kind of help you see around the board, or maybe see the entire board. But those are going to be listed on your card, and you're going to be able to see those rules in the compendium. So let's talk a little bit about activation. When you're activating your model, you can choose to either attack or move or attack. It's really up to you as far as the order in which you do those things. But one thing that you do need to keep in mind is that you're not able to split up those actions, meaning that your movement all has to take place at the same time, and your attacks all have to take place at the same time. So you can't, punch and then move and then punch another person. All of your attacks have to be done at one point. That's seems like kind of a hindrance, but there are traits that allow you to kind of break that up and allow you to get extra movements and maybe even extra attacks. So keep that in mind and look at your character card, read those traits so you know what you're doing. And you'll find exceptions to the rule, but know that generally, unless you have something that says otherwise, you cannot split up those actions. So we've talked about activating. Now let's talk about passing a little bit. What passing is it's something that you can do if your opponent has more models on the board than you have. So like if they have 4 models and you have 3 models, you're going to have 1 pass available to you. The difference between the number of models is basically how many passes you have, and you can use those throughout the round to kind of hold off a little bit. Since you have less models, it would be slightly unfair if you have to activate everything all right up front, and then the person who has more models can just kind of work around what you've already done. This kind of breaks that up and gives you a chance to kind of spread out your activations a little bit. That being said, you cannot do 2 passes in a row, meaning if it's your activation and you pass, your opponent would then activate a second model, and then after they're done, it would go back to you and you have to activate one of your models. You cannot pass again, even if you have a bunch of passes left over. Like I said, the number of passes you're going to have is the difference of models. So like I said, if they have 5 models and you have 2 models, you're going to have 3 passes. You're not going to be able to use those back to back, but you will have 3 passes. So that's kind of cool. Something to keep in mind when you're playing throughout the round, especially if you're heavily outnumbered. You're not going to want to just activate, because that might get you into trouble by the end of the round. So that's activating and passing. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the skill rolls and kind of how they work and what you need to roll to succeed. So let's talk a little bit about skill rolls. I know I've mentioned them in previous videos as far as like willpower skill rolls or agility skill rolls. And I'm going to kind of tell you how to do them and generally when's the situation that those are going to come up. So let's start with strength, since it's kind of the odd man out. Strength is going to be rolled when somebody's grappling you and you're trying to break free, or you're entangled or something like that. That's usually when you're going to roll a strength check. And to do that, you roll 1d6 and you need to roll equal to or more than your strength value. So if you have a strength of 3, you need to roll 3 or better to get a successful strength check. Moving on to agility. Agility is going to be kind of similar. You're actually going to roll 1d6, and to determine success for agility, you're going to need to roll equal to or less than. So unlike strength, you're going to roll lower than your movement value to determine success. So if you have a low-level henchman that has movement 2, might be kind of tricky. Generally, when you roll agility, it's going to be for like falling off buildings or trying to walk across icy patches from Mr. Freeze, that kind of stuff. Usually has to do with movement. Makes sense, it's agility. Moving on to endurance. Endurance is usually something you're going to roll if, as far as like traits, when somebody's using a trait against you, a lot of the times you'll have to end up rolling an endurance check to determine success, or if you resist the trait. And that's done by rolling 2d6, and like agility, you need to roll equal to or less than your endurance value. So if you have an endurance of 8, you need to roll 8 or less for a successful endurance check. Like I said, that is going to be with 2 dice, not just 1, so that might be a little bit trickier. Again, if you have some low-level henchmen, rolling 3 on 2 dice is not easy, but that's how it is. And moving on to willpower. Willpower is going to be basically the same. You're going to roll 2d6 and you need to go equal or less than for a success. Willpower has a lot to do with the mind control abilities. So if Deadman's trying to possess you, or Poison Ivy is trying to use some control pheromones or something like that, generally the characters are going to have to use willpower checks to kind of determine if that was successful or if they resisted. So that's pretty much how the skill rolls work. I'm going to pop up a little thing right up here to kind of show you how some of the modifiers work and when you would apply them. Usually this comes from like a trait or something like that. It'll say double this or have that. So I'll have this right here so you can kind of see in what order that would happen. I'm not going to go over all of it because it's just for time's sake. But what we're going to do now is we're going to move on down to the table, and we're going to go over some movement rules, and I'm going to kind of show you how you can get around the board and fall to your death. So let's get into it. Alrighty guys, so we're down here at the table here. You're going to have to pardon the unfinished terrain. I am in the process of getting everything all primed and painted, but I wanted to use this to kind of demonstrate how you can get around. Starting off with a basic move. Every character is going to be able to do a basic move, and it's going to be a 4-inch move. When you're measuring that out, you're going to measure from the front of your base, you're going to move your model, and you're going to end your movement before the edge of your ruler, meaning that you're not going to actually place the model on the end. So when you're measuring, make sure you measure from the front of the base to the front of the base, or from like the back of the base to the back of the base, if that's what you prefer. So that's pretty much your basic move. Like I mentioned in the character card video, you can spend movement counters to add an additional 2 inches to your movement. So all of those counters and everything kind of add up into your movement pool, and whenever you're navigating the board via jumping or doing whatever, it's all going to be pulled from that pool. So that's pretty much basic moves. Let's see here. Side note about that is that you cannot move through other models, so you do have to go around them, and also you cannot fit through spaces that your base would not actually fit through. So if there's like a narrow corridor and your base actually wouldn't be able to pass through that, you're gonna have to find another way around. That being said, if both players agree that maybe a doorway can, have large characters go through, even though physically they couldn't, that's up to you guys, and you guys can kind of discuss that before you play. So that's basic moving. So we'll now talk about impaired movement. Impaired movement is a term for this that's used in this game to kind of represent, having more difficulty getting around. So you're not just walking across, a sidewalk or a street or something like that. And impaired movement costs twice as much to move through. So what that means is that if you're trying to move 1 inch, what you're going to need to do is spend 2 inches from your movement pool. So basically it just doubles the cost of any movements you're trying to do. Keep this in mind because a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is basically just impaired movement with some extra stuff on there. First up, let's talk about obstacles. So you might have, mailboxes or, little electrical boxes and stuff, scattered around your board to kind of add a little flavor and give a little cover. Something to keep in mind is obstacles 1 inch or less can be moved over. They do not count against you as far as like requiring you to jump or climb. You can just pass right over them, but you do need to take their width into consideration. I mean, that's kind of common sense, but I mean, if you're going across an electrical box, you need to count the distance you're traveling. That's going to count against you just like any other normal movement. So that's pretty much obstacles. So let's talk a little bit about jumping. So let's scoot Batman up over here. So for jumping, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to spend 1 movement counter. So whenever you're doing your movement phase of your activation, you're going to spend 1 movement counter, and that's going to allow you to jump. Now, jumping is considered an impaired movement, so you're going to have to spend twice as much movement to get up, to where you want to go. That being said, whenever you're jumping, you do need to make sure that your model can actually fit into the place it's landing, and you need to account for that space as well. So let's see here, it looks like about 4 inches would get him up into the fire escape and also give him room for his base. Again, that being impaired terrain, that would mean he needs 8 inches to actually jump up there. So to do that, he'd spend his 8 inches, spend 1 movement counter, and he'd be able to move up into the fire escape. So that's jumping. Now let's talk about another form of jumping. It's called leap down. It's pretty much the same, but instead of being able to jump upwards or horizontally, you can only jump downwards. So if you're trying to get to a lower level, you can do a leap down. And you do that by spending 1 movement counter. So if he wanted to, kind of leap down here. If you're traveling distance, you do want to consider that, so that's going to count against him as far as the movement. But, he can spend 1 movement counter and then just boop, drop down. Like I said, it's not an impaired movement, so you're going to get your full movement value. But you do need to spend that 1 movement counter. So let's say Batman wanted to climb up onto this balcony here. So climbing is, you guessed it, an impaired movement. So it costs twice as much to do that. So we can measure this out, see what that would be. Let's see here, it's just about 2.5 inches. So for him to go up there, he would need at least 5 inches to get up to the edge, and then we need to make sure he has some space here. So that would be, about 6-7 inches. He's not really gonna have too many opportunities to have 12 inches in his pool, but of course this Batman has Bat Claw and other ways to get around. But for example, he would need to have about 10 inches of his movement pool to get up onto here. He would not have to spend a movement counter because climbing does not require it, but like jumping, you do need to be able to fit your model somewhere. They need to be able to rest. Maybe not, have their full space, but they do need to be able to be steady. If you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But, do keep that in mind. You can't, just have like a little marker on the edge of a little railing right here that's like, yeah, he's standing right there. Like that doesn't count. So that's climbing. So let's talk about when all those things don't go right. Whenever you're attempting to do a jump or a leap or a climb, like I said, you need to spend movement from your movement pool. If you run out of the movement, you're gonna fall. So if you try to make a jump and you just don't have enough movement, which I don't know why you would jump if you don't have enough movement, but that's not the point. If that happens, you're gonna end up falling. When you fall, you have to make an agility roll to determine if you're knocked down. So that kind of helps you find out if you land flat on your face or if you manage to stick the landing, which that's cool. But you also take damage. So when you fall, if you fall less than 2 inches, you're going to take 1 stun damage. Now, what I mean by that is, like, let's say you were jumping, let's say you're leaping down. Batman's going to leap down here. Now let's look at our total height is going to be just under 5.5 inches. Let's say he only has 2 inches to his movement pool. So if he's going to leap down, those first 2 inches are going to be free, and that's not going to count against him. But the rest of the distance is going to be, basically his falling distance. So that would mean that
he has, you know, 3.5 inches. So, you know, if he falls 2 to 4 inches, he's going to suffer 1 injury damage. So he would end up falling right there. Whenever you fall, you want to make sure it's just straight down against the ledge where you fell. And yeah, like I said, he's going to suffer 1 injury damage. And if he was to fall 4 to 8 inches, he would suffer 3 injury damage. That's kind of unfortunate. You want to try to avoid that if possible. And if you end up falling 8 inches or greater, you are considered a casualty. That is insta-death. So if for some reason you can possess a model or do something to get them to fall over 8 inches, that's a really easy way to take out a model. It doesn't matter how many hit points they have, they are considered a casualty if they fall over 8 inches. So let's say Batman over here ended up falling and he didn't make his agility roll, so he is considered prone. That would mean that he needs to stand up at the beginning of his next activation. To stand up your model, you just need to spend 1 action counter. You can spend you know, a movement counter, an attack counter, defense counter, or a special counter. It doesn't matter which one, but you just spend 1 of them, and you're going to be able to stand your model back up. It will be considered, you know, not knocked down anymore. So that's kind of fun. As far as crouching, you can take cover behind small pieces of terrain. If you have a piece of terrain that is 1/2 inch or greater, you're going to be able to spend 1 special counter and you'll be able to get a +1 to your defense against ranged attacks. So, you know, basically if you find a little mailbox or, you know, whatever you need that's not, you know, high enough to completely block your model, you can spend a special counter and get a little defense bonus from it. As far as what else you can do with movement, you can use it to manipulate objects. Mainly it's going to be objectives, so you can spend 1 movement counter to manipulate an object. You might have a rule on your table that, you know, opening doors requires you to manipulate or something like that. Usually it's going to be like some sort of flavor thing that you guys have for your table. Generally the only time you're going to manipulate something is it's going to be an objective. The only other thing we have to talk about as far as movement is concerned is we have sewers. So this is going to be the last way you can really get around the board, and we have our sewer tokens. Let's just put it right here so it might be a little easier to see for you. So let's move Batman up here. So if you want to use a sewer marker to get across the board, you just need to be in base contact with it. Once you're in base contact with it, you can spend 1 movement counter and 1 special counter, and you're going to be able to move your model to any other sewer location, as long as it's not covered up by a larger model. Meaning, like if you had, you know, Killer Croc or something kind of standing on the sewer grate, then you're not going to be able to have Batman get out. But you know, otherwise you just spend a movement counter and a special, and you're going to be able to move him wherever you'd like, as long as he is in base contact with another sewer marker. That being said, once you've used the sewers, you are no longer able to do anything else with your model, ending your activation. So you don't want to do that at the beginning of your activation, because that's going to be the only thing you can do. You know, if that's what you want to do, great, but keep that in mind that you're not going to be able to attack or do anything else after you've used the sewers. So that's moving around. We've talked about, you know, obstacles, jumping, falling, leaping, all that kind of stuff. Basic moves and all the other basic rules as far as, you know, line of sight. Like I said, line of sight, you're going to have a 360 view, so your character can see in all directions around them, and within 12 inches they're going to be able to target and see other models. So you can kind of just measure out from the edge of your base, and that's going to help you kind of show where they can see and who's going to be able to be within their kind of threat range. Right on, guys. So that's going to cover all this stuff. I will catch you guys next time in our next video where we talk about combat. We'll talk a little bit more about line of sight as far as ranged combat's concerned. You know, determining if they are getting cover or what's up. So that's going to be that. Hopefully I get that done soon, and I will see you guys next time. Oh, it's over? If you like the video, hit the like button. Don't forget to turn on notifications and subscribe if you want to stay up to date on everything related to Batman Miniatures game. Well, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you guys again. See you on the streets of Gotham.